The day Robert Hayes left only an envelope on the Christmas table was the day his children realized how badly they had failed the man who had given them everything. He just didn't know it yet as he walked into that house. Snow drifted over the Ohio suburb as Robert stood on his front porch, breath fogging in the cold air. The living room window glowed with the light of the Christmas tree as he held a small gift bag and rested his other hand on the doorknob, gathering the courage to step inside. Christmas had once been his favorite day of the year, but now it mostly reminded him how easily a person could disappear in a room full of family, and as he lingered there, he felt more like a delivery man than a father, carrying memories no one had asked for. Inside, his daughter Emily rushed past the hallway balancing a tray of appetizers, her phone wedged between cheek and shoulder as she made plans for a New Year's trip, barely noticing the way Robert paused to watch her. From the living room, his son Mark shouted about the football game, asking if anyone wanted another drink without glancing toward the door, his voice booming over the commentators on TV. The house sounded full of life, yet somewhere beneath the noise Robert felt like the only guest who hadn't really been invited, and he wondered if his presence on Christmas had quietly shifted from essential to optional, without anyone saying it out loud. The living room looked like an image from a holiday catalog, with stockings lined neatly over the stone fireplace, twinkling lights wrapped around the banister, and a careful pile of gifts under the tree. Matching red and white pajamas lay folded on the couch for Emily's kids, cocoa simmered on the stove, and a candle that smelled like cinnamon and pine burned steadily on the coffee table. The whole scene radiated warmth and belonging, yet everything around him felt beautiful in a way that hadn't been arranged with him in mind, and he stood there like someone who had stepped into the wrong memory. He hung his worn brown coat on the hook by the door, noticing how it sagged a little more each year, just like his shoulders. His fingers trembled as he unwound the scarf his late wife Helen had knitted decades ago, the yarn thin but still soft against his skin, and for a moment he pressed it to his face and could almost hear her laughing, calling him the heart of their family. Standing there between the entryway and the life moving around him, he felt less like a heart and more like a faded photograph left in a drawer. In the kitchen, Emily brushed past him again, carrying a plate of cookies with white icing and red sprinkles, her words quick and automatic as she said, "Dad, can you scoot over a little? I'm trying to get these on the table before the kids attack them." Robert stepped aside quickly and murmured an apology, though he wasn't sure what he had done wrong, his body turning sideways so she could pass as if he were part of the furniture. He opened his mouth to offer help, to ask if she needed anything at all, but her footsteps had already moved on, leaving his unsaid words stuck somewhere between his chest and his throat. The grandchildren raced through the house in a blur of excitement, their socks sliding on the hardwood as they chased each other around the furniture with candy canes clutched in their small hands. "Mom, can we open presents now? Uncle Mark promised," one of them yelled from the hallway, the sound bouncing over the noise from the TV. Robert watched them with soft, aching eyes, remembering when Emily and Mark were the ones jumping onto his bed at sunrise, and he wondered when he had stopped being the center of their joy and turned into background scenery. He sat at the far end of the dining table, where Helen had always insisted he sit at the head, because she said he was the anchor that held everyone together. Tonight, someone had placed him near the corner, close to the hallway where it would be easier for him to get up without disrupting anyone. The chair angled just slightly away from the main cluster of conversation. The table was set with matching plates, embroidered napkins, and tiny pine cones dusted with fake snow. But in front of Robert there was only a bare space where a name card should have been, and the emptiness there felt louder than every voice in the room. Robert cleared his throat, hoping someone might look up from their screens and busy talk long enough to really see him. "Need me to carve the turkey?" he asked, his voice quiet but steady, the same voice that had once told bedtime stories and late-night advice at this very table. Mark laughed from the opposite end, already standing with the carving knife in hand like he had been waiting for that question, and said, "I've got it, Dad. You just relax and enjoy," as if Robert were a fragile ornament that might shatter if he tried to be useful. His offer floating in the air for a second, before it sank unnoticed into the noise. Conversation flowed around him like a fast river he was no longer strong enough to swim in, and every attempt to step into it felt like wading against a current that pushed him back. Emily talked about impossible deadlines at the marketing firm. Mark grumbled about office politics and bonuses, and the kids debated which video game console was better while their fingers still tapped at screens. Occasionally someone turned to Robert and tossed him a polite question about his health or retirement, then turned away before he finished answering. And if you were sitting at that table, you would have to ask yourself, would you notice the one person whose silence carried an entire lifetime of stories? His plate sat mostly untouched, the turkey cooling as the mashed potatoes stiffened around the edges and the gravy turned dull. The clink of cutlery and bursts of laughter rang in his ears, each sound reminding him that this holiday no longer seemed to belong to him in the way it once had. He glanced at the empty chair beside him, where Helen had once sat with her joy loud enough to drag him into every conversation, and now her absence was the only thing at the table that seemed to leave space for him, a fragile opening no one knew how to fill. At one point Emily pulled out her phone and began recording a video, her voice instantly brighter as she said, "Okay, Hayes family, say Merry Christmas," and lifted the screen. Everyone raised their glasses or waved, smiles stretching wide for a moment that would live on her social media as a tiny moving picture of what looked like a perfect night. Robert lifted his hand halfway, then let it fall when he realized Emily had angled the phone just enough that he was cut by the frame, his face reduced to a sliver at the edge, and he wondered how a man could be so present and still not really appear. If you were in his place, would you call this love or just habit? The quiet narrator inside his chest seemed to whisper as he took a slow sip of water, trying to swallow the knot that had formed in his throat. Across the table, Mark was already scrolling on his own phone between bites, laughing at a meme a coworker had sent, and the blue glow from their screens looked brighter than the light in anyone's eyes. For a second Robert wondered when he had become easier to ignore than a notification, and if this moment hits you, tell me honestly, have you ever watched someone hide their pain just to keep the room from feeling awkward? After dinner, the presents were opened in a flurry of torn paper and overlapping voices, the living room quickly turning into a colorful mess. Emily's kids ripped through their boxes, barely pausing to say thank you before lunging toward the next toy, while Mark handed Emily a small velvet box with a bracelet inside, and she hugged him, thanking him for actually listening months ago. Robert watched from his corner, the small gift bag at his feet still unopened and its handles twisted tight from how long he'd been gripping them, and a quiet question rose up inside him. If he vanished tomorrow, how different would this scene really look? When Emily finally seemed to remember, she grabbed a plain store bag from the sideboard and handed it to him with a quick, distracted smile. "Here you go, Dad. Sorry, no wrapping this year. It's been insane," she said, as he pulled out a generic sweater, the kind that could have belonged to any older man on any clearance rack. Robert smiled and said it was perfect, even though the size was wrong, and the color was one Helen had always teased him about hating, and in that quiet mismatch a decision formed in his heart, asking a question you might ask yourself too. If you were in his place, would you forgive this kind of forgetfulness or finally choose to do the one thing they never expected, starting with a single envelope on the table? Robert had thought about that envelope long before this Christmas, long before the turkey cooled on plates, and his sweater stayed folded in its bag. The idea had come to him on a quiet afternoon in early December, when he was sitting alone at his kitchen table with a mug of black coffee and an old photo album open in front of him. The more he turned the pages, the more one truth settled in his chest. Somewhere along the way, they had stopped seeing him, but he had never stopped seeing them. He remembered a very different Christmas, decades earlier, in a cramped two-bedroom rental on the east side of Cleveland. Emily had been 5, Mark 7, and the living room floor had been more hand-me-down than polished hardwood, the wallpaper peeling in one corner near a drafty window. Robert had spent the night before working a double shift at the factory because overtime meant he could afford the dollhouse Emily wanted and the baseball glove Mark had circled in the Sears catalog, and he had come home with his fingers raw and his back screaming. Yet when the sun came up and the kids ran into the living room, Helen whispered, "Smile, Rob. They're about to remember this morning for the rest of their lives." He could still see the way Emily's face lit up when she saw the crooked pink dollhouse, its stickers slightly misaligned from his clumsy hands at 2 a.m. Mark had slipped his new glove on immediately, pounding his fist into the leather and announcing he would make the team that year for sure. Robert had watched them with tears prickling his eyes, feeling like the richest man in Ohio even though his checking account was hanging by a thread. If you've ever seen a parent give their very last bit of energy just to see a child smile, you know there's a kind of love that doesn't ask for anything in return. Until one day, without meaning to, it finally does. Years later, when the kids were teenagers, Christmas shifted from toys to traditions. They would all pile into the old blue Ford Taurus and drive through the neighborhoods with the good lights, passing mug after mug of hot chocolate back and forth. Helen would lean her head on Robert's shoulder at stoplights, their fingers intertwined over the gear shift, and the kids would roll their eyes at every off-key carol he sang. He can still hear Emily saying from the back seat, "Dad, you're so embarrassing." But her voice was laughing, not cold, and that difference mattered more than anyone realized. Back then, the house still smelled like cinnamon rolls on Christmas morning, and Helen's voice filled every room with warmth. She would stand in the kitchen humming familiar hymns as she kneaded dough, flour on her cheeks and laughter in her eyes. When Robert walked by, she'd tap him with the back of her floury hand and say, "You're the one who made all this possible. You know that?" He never believed her, but every time she said it, the words stitched another thread into the fabric of his heart. Then came the Christmas when Helen started coughing more than laughing, her hand pressed to her chest as she leaned against the counter. The doctor said it was pneumonia at first, then something more complicated, then something they all stopped naming out loud. That year, Robert watched her wrap each gift with trembling fingers, insisting on writing every tag in her own handwriting. "So the kids remember it's from us, not just from you." Sue, he didn't realize until much later that she had already decided that Christmas would be her last big performance as the center of their home. After Helen died in late autumn the following year, the first Christmas without her felt like walking into a church after the choir had gone home. The tree still stood in its usual corner. The ornaments still caught the light, but the house felt hollow in a way even the kids didn't know how to fix. Emily cried quietly during dinner. Mark disappeared into the garage under the excuse of looking for something, and Robert kept hearing Helen's laugh echo in all the spaces she used to fill. If you've ever lost the one person who glued everyone together, you know there's a strange silence that moves in long before anyone says the word grief. Back then, the kids tried in their own clumsy ways to be there for him. Mark invited him to stay later for dessert. Emily made a point of calling every few days in December to check on him. But as the years stretched and their own lives filled up with deadlines and school concerts and office parties, the calls grew shorter, and the invitations started sounding more like obligations than genuine desire. Robert didn't blame them. Life had a way of tugging them in 100 directions at once. He just didn't know how to say that. Sometimes the quiet between their words felt louder than any argument. He remembered the night Emily had shown up on his doorstep in college, mascara smudged and heartbroken, when a boyfriend had cheated on her. She had thrown herself into his arms and sobbed into his shirt, leaving black stains on the cotton as he held her, whispering the same phrase over and over. "You are not hard to love, Em. He was just too small for the love you carry." They had fallen asleep on the couch, and he had woken up with a stiff neck and a deep sense of purpose. As long as he was alive, his children would never face pain alone. If you were in his place watching that same daughter barely look up from her phone on Christmas, would that memory comfort you or cut a little deeper? He thought of Mark, too, how he had called him from a police station once in his early 20s after a stupid bar fight nearly turned into something much worse. Robert had driven 40 minutes at 3 a.m. on icy roads, hands clenched on the steering wheel, imagining every possible ending. When he finally saw his son sitting on the hard plastic chair, shoulders slumped and eyes red, he didn't lecture him, didn't shout. He simply put a hand on his shoulder and said, "You get one life." Don't waste it proving pain to people who don't even know your middle name," and paid the fine without another word. Over time, though, the center of gravity in their family shifted. Emily started hosting Christmas at her house because it was easier for the kids, and Robert agreed because he didn't want to be the one holding anyone back. Little by little, the old traditions fell away. The late-night drive to see Christmas lights, the handwritten notes tucked into stockings, the quiet moment when they would all share one thing they were grateful for before opening presents. In their place came store-bought pies, rushed schedules, and group photos where he was sometimes included and sometimes not, depending on who was holding the phone. One year, the shift became impossible to ignore. Robert arrived at Emily's house right on time, holding a casserole dish the way Helen used to, only to find that most of the family had already eaten because the kids were starving and couldn't wait.
His plate was reheated in the microwave, the food drying out at the edges, and while everyone assured him they were "just so glad you made it, Dad," he felt like someone who had bought a ticket to a show but missed the first act. Have you ever walked into a room where you used to belong and suddenly wondered when they stopped saving you a seat? The year after that, he overheard something that settled in his bones like ice.
He had stepped into the hallway to hang up his coat when he heard Emily's voice from the kitchen, hushed, but not enough. I feel guilty if we don't invite him, you know," she said to Mark. "But it's exhausting worrying if he's bored or lonely the whole time." Mark had replied, "Yeah, but what are we supposed to do? He's our dad. It is what it is." And they both sighed, like the weight of him was heavier than any gift under the tree. Robert stood there staring at the pattern on the hallway rug, suddenly unsure of where to put his feet. A few months later, a doctor at the clinic told Robert he had to start taking his heart more seriously. Literally, there were numbers on a chart, words like risk factors and monitoring and lifestyle changes, and a subtle suggestion that he shouldn't be living entirely alone anymore. Robert nodded, listened, and walked out into the parking lot with a pamphlet he never showed anyone, folding it into quarters and tucking it under a stack of utility bills. He told himself he didn't want to worry the kids, but somewhere deep down, he also feared the possibility that they might not rearrange their lives even if they knew. That was when he made his first appointment with a lawyer, a man with a tidy office overlooking a strip mall and a polite smile that didn't reach his eyes. They went over the will he had written years ago, back when Helen was alive and everything was simpler, and the lawyer asked if anything had changed. Robert hesitated for a long moment, then said quietly, "I just want to make sure the people who show up only when there's something to gain don't get to write the ending of my story." The lawyer nodded in a way that told him he'd heard that sentence more often than anyone should. The envelope idea came to life a week before Christmas, when Robert sat in that same office signing a final set of papers. The lawyer slid a plain white envelope across the desk with a neatly typed label bearing his children's names. "You can choose when to give this to them," he said, "or if." Robert held the envelope in his hands, feeling how light it was compared to the weight it carried, and wondered whether love sometimes meant stepping aside so the truth could finally walk in. On Christmas morning, before heading to Emily's house, Robert sat at his own worn kitchen table with a pen and a stack of lined paper. He wrote a letter in his uneven script, stopping often to rub the ache out of his fingers, trying to put decades of fatherhood into words that wouldn't sound like accusations or pleas. He told them stories they'd forgotten, mentioned nights they never even knew about, and asked the kind of questions most parents are too afraid to say out loud, like, "If I stopped calling, how long would it take for you to notice the silence?" If you've ever wanted to speak a hard truth to someone you love, you know how heavy a single page can feel. When he was done, he folded the letter and slid it carefully into the envelope, pressing the flap firmly until it sealed. He wrote, "For Emily and Mark" on the front, then held it against his chest for a moment, as if checking whether his heart still beat beneath it. As he stood up, he thought of Helen, of all the Christmases they had survived and all the ones they had lost, and whispered into the empty kitchen, "Help me do this right." Little did he know the real storm was only beginning. Robert walked up the driveway, carrying the envelope in his coat pocket. feeling its shape against his chest with every step. The sky had turned a soft winter blue, and the air held that sharp December bite that used to make Helen rub her hands together and say, "Feels like Christmas for real." He paused at the front door longer than he intended, telling himself that the envelope wasn't a threat. It was simply the truth. But sometimes the truth feels like a knife even when it's meant to heal. Inside, the living room buzzed with voices and the faint sound of wrapping paper being crumpled. Emily's laughter floated from the kitchen, followed by the clatter of dishes as she directed the final touches for dessert. Mark stood near the fireplace, showing one of the kids how to fix a toy that had already broken, his voice booming with playful confidence. Robert watched them for a moment, wondering if he was seeing a family that no longer had a space carved out for him, or if he had mistaken a blind spot for a wall. He cleared his throat softly as he stepped fully into the room, but no one turned. The tree lights reflected off the windows, scattering little flecks of color across the room, like confetti from a celebration he hadn't truly been invited to. Robert forced himself to smile as he hung his coat, keeping his hand pressed over the envelope. He had come here to give it, not to second-guess himself, but doubt crept in like a cold draft under a door. During dessert, Emily went around the table asking everyone about their favorite holiday memory. She did it every year for the sake of tradition, though the answers felt more rushed now, squeezed between phone alerts and stories about coworkers. When it came to Robert's turn, she barely looked up from cutting a slice of pie. "Dad? Favorite Christmas?" Quickly. Kids want to open the rest of their gifts. Robert opened his mouth, his mind full of memories stitched with Helen's voice, the kids' small hands, their laughter echoing in tiny apartments and rental houses. "I think," he began slowly, "it was the year," but Mark cut in before he could finish. "I swear the best Christmas was when we got that trampoline," he said, slapping the table with his palm. Everyone laughed, jumping straight into the story as if Robert hadn't been speaking at all. His half-formed memory faded into the noise, and he swallowed the ache with a sip of lukewarm coffee. If you were sitting in that chair, would you keep trying? Or would your heart start whispering that maybe this time saying nothing hurts less? When dessert ended, Emily stood and clapped her hands lightly. "Okay, everyone, group photo time, before the kids destroy the house again." She herded the group into place near the tree, adjusting hair and straightening collars. Robert quietly walked toward them, expecting someone to call him over. But Emily simply angled the camera, then said, "Perfect. Hold still." He wasn't in the frame. He wasn't even in the room she was focused on. Robert froze in place, watching the screen display a cheerful family. His family, smiling beneath twinkling lights while he stood 3 feet to the left, invisible in plain sight. And maybe it was the gentleness of Helen's scarf around his neck, or the envelope weighing heavy in his pocket, but for the first time, he allowed himself to consider the possibility that this wasn't forgetfulness. It was a pattern. After the photo, people dispersed quickly. Wrapping paper littered the floor, kids zoomed off to their rooms with toys, and Emily began stacking plates with the mechanical rhythm of someone eager to reset the day. Mark checked his phone again, thumb-tapping with the kind of urgency he didn't show toward people he took for granted. Robert walked to the dining table and placed his hands on the back of the chair he had been moved to, his new spot, not at the head, not beside anyone, just there. He took a deep breath, reached into his coat, and slid the envelope out. Everything around him blurred into a quiet hum. The laughter, the footsteps, the whir of the dishwasher. None of it reached him fully. He placed the envelope neatly in the center of the table, where each of them would see it on their way out. No booze, no glitter, just truth. But before he stepped away, something unexpected happened. Emily's youngest, Abby, no more than 8 years old, tugged on his sleeve. Her eyes were wide, soft, full of the innocence that adults often lose without realizing it. "Grandpa," she said quietly, "are you sad? You look like you're leaving early." Robert knelt down, gently brushing a strand of hair from her forehead. "Sweetheart," he whispered, "sometimes grown-ups carry quiet feelings, but it's very kind of you to ask. If you're sad, you can sit with me," she offered, her voice barely above a whisper. The offer shook him more than anything that had happened that day. Children see what adults refuse to look at, and her small hand holding his felt more like family than anything he had felt all evening. If this moment hits you, tell me, have you ever been seen by the one person everyone else overlooked? Emily called from the kitchen. Abby, come help with the dishes. The little girl squeezed Robert's hand one more time before running off, leaving him alone again in the quiet corner of the room. Robert stood there, staring at the envelope. It suddenly felt heavier than paper had any right to be. He wondered if he should move it, hide it, delay the truth for one more year. But then he heard something from the hallway, voices low, annoyed, unmistakably about him. Emily's voice, clipped and tired. I love Dad, but I can't keep pretending every year. He's just so checked out. It's like having another kid to manage. Mark sighed. I know. It's not even fun anymore. Honestly, I wish he'd just do his own thing. We'll figure something out next year. Robert's breath caught. Their footsteps approached, and as he turned toward the sound of their voices, he realized he wasn't the only one standing near the envelope. Standing beside the envelope was someone Robert hadn't noticed before, a tall man in a dark winter coat, holding a camera bag and adjusting the strap on his shoulder. At first Robert didn't recognize him. Then the man turned slightly, revealing a familiar face framed by a neatly trimmed beard and eyes that carried the same quiet attentiveness Robert had once seen in Helen. It was Daniel Parker, the neighbor from 2 doors down, the man who always shoveled his own sidewalk and then kept going until Robert's was cleared too, the man who had once fixed Robert's mailbox without being asked, the man who waved every morning, even when Robert felt too tired or too lonely to wave back. Daniel? Robert whispered, surprised. What are you doing here? Daniel gave a small, almost apologetic smile. Emily asked me to come take a few family photos. She said professional pictures would look nicer for her Christmas post this year. Robert blinked, feeling the bruise of that sentence settle in his chest. Professional photos. For a perfect family image, one he hadn't even been included in. Daniel glanced down at the envelope on the table, then back at Robert with an expression that wasn't pity. It was understanding. I came in early, he said quietly. Door was cracked open. I didn't want to interrupt. Behind them, Emily and Mark's voices drifted closer, still sharp, still unfiltered. Seriously, Mark, he barely talks anymore. It's awkward, and the kids notice. He just sits there. Yeah, and I'm tired of feeling guilty every holiday. It's like keeping him entertained is our job. Daniel's eyes flicked toward the hallway with a tight frown. They don't know you can hear them. Robert swallowed hard. They think I'm a burden. Daniel shook his head softly. They think love is convenient. It's not. Something in that sentence cracked open a small place inside Robert, something he had held tightly closed for too long. Emily and Mark stepped into the dining room just as Robert turned toward them. But before they could see him fully, before they could see Daniel, Daniel's phone vibrated loudly in his pocket. He pulled it out, glanced at the screen, and his eyebrows shot up. It's the realtor, Daniel murmured under his breath. He says your showing starts in 30 minutes. Robert froze. Showing. Daniel inhaled sharply, realizing too late what he had revealed. Emily and Mark stopped walking. A beat of silence stretched between the four of them. What showing? Emily asked sharply. Daniel looked at Robert, silently asking permission. Robert exhaled, shoulders sinking further than they had all night. I'm selling the house, he said quietly. Emily's face twisted. Since when? Why didn't you tell us? Robert clasped his hands behind his back. I wasn't sure you'd want to hear, Mark scoffed. Seriously, Dad, we would have helped, but you can't just make huge decisions alone. We're your family. The hypocrisy in that sentence felt almost comical. Daniel stepped forward, careful, respectful, but firm. He did tell someone, he said, his tone even. He told me. Emily whipped her head toward him. What? Why you? Daniel remained calm. Because I noticed the for sale sign leaning in his garage last month, and because he seemed alone. He hesitated. More alone than someone should be. Emily's cheeks flushed with embarrassment or anger. Mark crossed his arms, jaw tight. This is none of your business, man. Daniel didn't back down. I agree, but neither is leaving a parent to eat holiday meals alone in a crowd. Silence fell like snow. A heavy, undeniable truth. If you're reading this, ask yourself, when someone tells you the truth about your own behavior, do you listen or do you defend yourself until the truth walks away entirely? Emily's voice wavered for the first time. Dad, are you sick? Is that why you're doing this? Robert shook his head. I'm tired, Emily. Tired in a way that has nothing to do with sickness. Tired of being a ghost in rooms where I once belonged. Mark frowned. So what? You're punishing us. With an envelope. Robert placed a hand on the back of a chair to steady himself. It's not punishment. It's clarity. Daniel stepped closer, lowering his voice. Robert, the showing. You don't have to go alone. I can drive you. Mark bristled. He doesn't need you. He has us. Daniel glanced at Robert again. Does he? Emily bit her lip, tears forming at the edges of her eyes, but not falling. Not yet. Dad. What's in the envelope? Robert's hand hovered over it, trembling. He wasn't sure whether to tell them now or let them discover it on their own. He wasn't even sure which choice would hurt less. The room tightened around him, the Christmas lights flickering like a heartbeat growing unsteady. And then a small voice broke the silence. Mom? Abby stood in the doorway holding her new stuffed reindeer. Why is Grandpa crying? Emily spun around, startled. Honey, he's not. But Abby stepped closer and took Robert's hand in both of hers. Grandpa, she whispered, please don't leave yet. Her words cracked something in the adults that none of their arguments could. Mark closed his eyes. Emily covered her mouth. Daniel stepped back, giving them space. And Robert finally realized who in this room still saw him. But before he could respond, before he could kneel and tell Abby the truth he'd hidden for years, they all heard a knock at the front door. A slow, deliberate knock from the last person any of them ever expected to confront on Christmas night. The knock echoed through the house like it carried winter itself inside it. Slow, deliberate, and unmistakably intentional. Everyone froze. Even the Christmas lights seemed to pause mid-twinkle, flickering unsteadily across the walls as a hush fell over the room. Emily wiped at her eyes, attempting to compose herself. Who on earth? She whispered. But Robert knew. He felt it in his bones before his mind caught up. Not the realtor, not a neighbor, not a delivery person. The rhythm of that knock belonged to someone who didn't rush, someone who carried purpose, someone who had come to deliver something, whether or not everyone in the room was ready to receive it. Robert's breath hitched. Daniel glanced at him. Should I get it? Robert swallowed hard. No, I should. He gently squeezed Abby's hand and slowly walked toward the foyer. His steps were steady, but something in his chest trembled, like a string pulled too tight. Behind him, he could feel the eyes of his children, unsure now, confused, almost frightened by the shift in the air. When he opened the door, a gust of cold air swept inside, scattering pine-scented candles and rustling wrapping paper still lying on the floor. Standing on the porch was a woman bundled in a navy coat, her gray hair pinned back neatly, her gloved hands gripping a manila folder. Her eyes, sharp, assessing, familiar, met his instantly. Mrs. Donovan, Robert breathed. Emily's head snapped toward the door. Mom's lawyer? Mark stiffened. Why is she here? Mrs. Donovan stepped inside without waiting to be invited. She carried the kind of authority that didn't require permission. Snow dusted her coat shoulders as she spoke in her clear, steady voice. Robert, she said, I called earlier, but your phone went to voicemail. I'm sorry to arrive unannounced on Christmas, but something urgent came across my desk this afternoon. Robert's heartbeat slowed. Is it about the estate? Emily blanched. Estate? Dad? What is going on? Mrs. Donovan didn't answer her. Instead, she looked directly at Robert with a gentleness that made his stomach twist. It's about Helen, she said softly. The room stopped breathing. Even the children in the hallway fell silent. Emily pressed a hand to her chest. Mom? Mark took a step forward. She passed away 10 years ago, What could possibly— Mrs. Donovan opened the folder. Your wife left one final document that was misfiled. We discovered it during an internal audit. It was meant to be delivered today. Robert's knees weakened. Daniel stepped closer, ready to steady him if needed. What document? Robert whispered. Mrs. Donovan pulled out a sealed envelope thicker than any holiday card. Across the front, written in Helen's unmistakable handwriting, were the words, "For Robert, Emily, and Mark, on a Christmas when you most need to hear me." Emily covered her mouth with both hands, instantly breaking into sobs she tried and failed to contain. Mark let out a breath that sounded like something inside him had cracked. Robert stared at the handwriting he knew better than his own signature. He reached for the envelope with trembling fingers. But Mrs. Donovan didn't release it. "There's more," she said quietly. Helen attached a recorded message as well. A video. It was never played. It was meant for all of you. Daniel exhaled. A video? 10 years old? Mrs. Donovan nodded once. She recorded it 2 weeks before she passed. It was sealed with instructions. Deliver only on a Christmas when they've forgotten how to listen to one another. Emily's sob caught in her throat. She knew. Mark's face broke open. Mom always knew. Robert closed his eyes, a tear sliding down his cheek. Helen's voice, the one he'd played in his memory for a decade, almost felt like it was already in the room. Mrs. Donovan placed the envelope in his hands. She trusted you to open it when the moment was right. Daniel stepped back, realizing this was family territory now. Not his to intrude on, but perhaps his to support from the sidelines. Robert turned toward his children. Emily's makeup streaked, Mark's eyes red, Abby holding on to her stuffed reindeer, confused but sensing the gravity. Robert spoke softly. Your mother never left us. Not really. Emily let out a sob so raw it pulled her shoulders inward. Dad, please, open it. I can't wait. Mark nodded, voice breaking. Yeah, let's hear her. Please? Robert held the envelope to his chest for one long, trembling moment before sliding his thumb under the seal. The paper tore. Emily and Mark leaned in. Abby stepped closer. Even the house seemed to listen. He opened the flap and pulled out a USB drive and a handwritten letter addressed to all of them. Robert unfolded the letter. But before he could read a single word, the front door, still slightly ajar, swung open sharply, and someone stepped inside, breathless, panicked, clutching something that made Emily gasp so loudly she dropped to her knees. The figure who stumbled through the half-open door looked like he had run through the snow at full speed, cheeks flushed, coat unbuttoned, breath coming in sharp bursts. In his hand, gripped so tightly his knuckles were white, was an object wrapped in an old floral handkerchief. It was Helen's. Robert recognized it instantly. Emily gasped. Mark's eyes widened like he'd seen a ghost. The man, thin, slightly hunched, mid-40s, looked around the room as though searching for someone to blame and someone to save all at once. When he finally spotted Robert, he froze. Mr. Hayes, he said, voice shaking. I'm sorry. I couldn't wait until tomorrow. You needed to have this today. She said Christmas. Robert stepped closer, heartbeat thundering. Who are you? The man swallowed hard. My name is Tom Weaver. Your wife, Helen, helped me years ago. I worked at the rehabilitation center where she spent her last weeks. I was the night nurse on duty. Emily covered her mouth. She remembered the center. She remembered the gentle staff, the rotating nurses. But she did not remember Tom. Tom held out the handkerchief bundle with trembling hands. This belonged to her. She made me promise to deliver it to you when the time was right. I kept it safe. Too safe, maybe. I couldn't find the courage until today. Robert reached for the bundle, but before touching it, he hesitated. Why now? Tom's voice broke. Because I saw your house listed for sale this morning. He looked around, nervous. And people like you, people who love quietly, they don't always say goodbye before leaving. I thought maybe this was the Christmas she meant. Robert's chest tightened. Emily whispered, Dad, what is that? Tom stepped backward slightly, overwhelmed by all the eyes on him. I don't know what's inside. She gave it to me sealed, told me it was the last part of her heart. I know that sounds dramatic, but she said it with a kind of peace. Robert slowly unwrapped the handkerchief. Inside was an antique locket, gold, dented on one side, delicate like something held 1,000 times. The clasp was broken, but the engraving on the back was unmistakable. H+R. Still yours. Robert's breath caught. His fingers trembled as he held the locket like it was a warm piece of Helen's hand. Emily began to cry again, but this time the sound was softer, like grief turning into longing instead of pain. Mark rubbed his face with both hands. I didn't even know she had this. Robert closed his eyes. She wore it the day we met, and the day we married. Tom shifted uncomfortably, guilt pushing at his voice. I should have come sooner. I'm sorry. Robert looked up at him gently. You came when she meant you to. Tom nodded, tears suddenly pooling. She talked about you every night, about how you were the best thing that ever happened to her. She said if the world forgot to be gentle, you never would. Ah, those words struck Robert with such force that his shoulders caved inward, grief finally breaking through the numbness he had carried for a decade. Emily walked to him, hesitating for the briefest moment before placing a trembling hand on his arm. Dad, I'm so sorry. I didn't know you were carrying all of this alone. And for the first time that night, her voice sounded like the little girl who once cried into his shirt about a broken heart. Robert looked at her, really looked at her, and something inside him softened. A thin strand of hope, fragile, but real. If I had known, Emily whispered, I would have been here, I swear. Mark stepped forward, his voice raw. Me too, Dad. I know we haven't been the best, but we're here now. If you're reading this, tell me honestly. Have you ever realized too late that someone you love was fading right in front of you? Robert's lips quivered. We can't change what's past. But maybe we can change what comes next. Hope flickered across Emily's face. Mark nodded silently, jaw trembling. Tom stepped toward the door. I'll leave you to your family. Merry Christmas, Mr. Hayes, and thank you for the kind of love that leaves ripples. He slipped out, closing the door softly behind him. Robert held the locket to his chest. Emily stepped beside him. Mark moved closer on his other side. Abby wrapped her arms around his leg. For the first time all evening, Robert felt warmth. Not the warmth of candles or Christmas lights, but the warmth of being seen. He opened Helen's letter with careful fingers. The first line made everyone step closer. But before he could read the second line aloud, a soft chime sounded from the USB drive as it automatically connected to the smart TV behind them, and a video began to load with Helen's face slowly appearing through the static. Helen's face appeared slowly, pixel by pixel, as if time itself were stitching her back into the room. The video stabilized, revealing her sitting upright in a hospital bed, wrapped in a soft floral robe, sunlight pouring through the window behind her. Her hair was thinner, her cheeks a little hollow, but her eyes were the same, warm, sharp, alive. Emily gasped, hand flying to her mouth. Mark staggered back a step as though he'd been struck. Abby clung tighter to Robert's leg, sensing the adult's tremor even if she didn't fully understand it. Robert could not breathe. Helen, he whispered, touching the screen with trembling fingers. On the video, Helen smiled gently. If you're watching this, she began, voice thin but steady, it means I didn't get as much time as I hoped, but I'm not here to say goodbye. I'm here to tell you something. Something you may not want to hear. The room leaned in, held captive by the voice of the one person whose absence had shaped their entire world. Helen cleared her throat softly. Robert, my love, I know you. Better than you know yourself sometimes. I know you'll try to carry the weight of the world on your back, even when your knees are shaking. She paused. But you were never meant to carry that weight alone. Robert closed his eyes, a tear sliding down his face. Emily gripped his arm as though his heartbreak were her own. Helen continued, turning her gaze toward the camera with startling clarity. And Emily, sweetheart, I know you'll run from your feelings when they get too big. You'll keep yourself so busy that you start believing love is something to schedule between obligations. Emily's knees buckled slightly. She grabbed the back of a chair for support. And Mark, Helen said with a slow, knowing smile, my strong, stubborn boy. You hide behind sarcasm and noise so you don't have to face the quiet places where fear lives. But the quiet is where truth begins. Don't avoid it. Mark wiped his eyes with the back of his hand, failing to pretend he wasn't crying. Helen took a breath, the camera shaking softly as a nurse adjusted it beside her. I've watched this family love deeply. I've watched you laugh, fight, grow, break, rebuild. But I need to tell you something none of you want to admit. Robert tensed. Emily froze. Mark's jaw clenched. Helen's eyes softened with sorrow. One day, you're going to forget how precious time is. You'll get busy, distracted, comfortable. You'll start believing the people who raised you will always be there when you finally have a moment to look up. She leaned closer to the camera, her expression almost stern. But one day, you'll look up, and someone will be missing. The words hit like a shockwave. Emily crumbled into silent sobs. Mark looked away, visibly shaken. Robert pressed the locket tighter to his chest. Helen's voice gentled again. When that day comes, don't hide behind excuses. Don't pretend you didn't see the loneliness in someone's eyes. Don't wait for the world to remind you what you should have remembered on your own. The room swallowed her message whole. Every face reflected something different. Guilt, regret, grief, love. But all of them reflected truth. Then Helen's tone shifted, softer, more urgent. I left something for you, she said. Something that explains everything. Something Robert doesn't know. Something you must hear together. Robert's heartbeat stumbled. Something I don't know, he whispered. Helen looked right into the lens. Robert, my darling, you deserved more than I was able to give you in those final months. Emily glanced sharply at him. Mark frowned. What does she mean? Helen hesitated, then exhaled shakily. I wasn't only at the nursing center for my illness. The room snapped still. Robert's hands tightened around the chair. I discovered something, Helen said softly. Something about our family. About a choice someone made long before you ever felt distance from the kids. Robert blinked, confused. Emily looked terrified. Mark's eyes widened. Helen swallowed. I kept it from you because I wanted to protect you. I didn't want your heart to carry a wound it couldn't heal. Her voice trembled. But the truth always finds its way home. Robert felt the floor tilt beneath him. Helen, he whispered to the screen. What truth? Helen's gaze shifted downward for a moment, gathering strength. My love, she said. The loneliness you've been feeling. The distance. The way the kids slowly drifted. Emily's breath caught painfully. Mark leaned forward, eyes locked on the screen. It wasn't your fault, Helen whispered. It began with something the kids were told, something they believed, something that changed the course of your relationship without you ever knowing. Robert's pulse thundered in his ears. Emily let out a small cry, shaking her head. Mom, please don't. Mark backed up a step. Don't say it. Please don't say it. Helen's eyes filled with tears. I'm sorry, she said, but your father deserves the truth. Robert's voice cracked open. The truth about what? Helen inhaled. And then the video glitched, freezing her face mid-sentence, as if someone somewhere didn't want the next words to be heard. The screen froze with Helen's tear-filled eyes staring directly into Robert's soul. The sound cut out in a jagged buzz, the image pixelating as though the universe itself was holding its breath. Emily stepped forward immediately. Fix it, she cried, grabbing the remote with trembling hands. Please, just fix it. Mark rushed to the TV, frantically tapping buttons. Come on, don't do this now, not now. But the video refused to move. Helen's frozen expression hovered in the room like a ghost trying to speak. Robert took a slow, shaky step closer, feeling the weight of every unanswered moment pressing against his chest. She was going to tell me, he whispered. She was finally going to tell me what happened. Emily turned to him, tears streaking her face. Dad, whatever Mom was talking about, we didn't do anything on purpose. Her voice cracked, revealing a guilt she had carried in silence for years. Mark swallowed hard. Dad, there's something you need to know. Something we should have told you a long time ago. Robert turned toward him, heart pounding. What did she mean? What were you told? Mark's eyes darted away. It wasn't, Dad, it wasn't your fault. Mom was right, but someone said something. Someone made us believe. Before he could finish, Daniel stepped forward quietly. Try unplugging the TV for 30 seconds. Sometimes that resets the buffer. Mark shot him a grateful look. He was drowning, desperate for anything to do with his hands. Yeah. Okay. He pulled the plug, his fingers shaking. Robert stayed focused on Emily. What were you told? Emily wiped her nose with her sleeve, unable to look him in the eye. Dad, when Mom got sick, someone came to the house. Someone who said things that scared us. Robert's breath caught. Who? Emily clutched her stomach, her voice barely a whisper. A social worker. Robert staggered back. A what? Mark replaced the plug into the outlet with trembling hands. She said some things that made us think you couldn't take care of yourself, or us. That you were unstable. That you'd made mistakes we didn't know about. Robert felt like the room was tilting. What mistakes? Mark shook his head violently. We didn't want to believe her, Dad. But we were kids, and Mom was so sick, and we didn't know what to do. Emily sobbed. She said Mom told her things. That you left her alone. That you weren't safe. That you were unreliable. Robert stared at them, stunned. Your mother would never. Emily screamed. We didn't know that. Then she collapsed into a chair, burying her face in her hands. We were terrified. We believed her. And we never told you because we were ashamed. Robert's vision blurred. Who was this person? What was her name? Mark rubbed his temples. Mrs. Gordon. She said she was evaluating families with terminally ill parents. She told us Mom had admitted things about you, things that weren't true. But we were young. Daniel took a cautious step toward them. Robert, that name is familiar. Emily looked up, confused. What do you mean? Daniel exhaled deeply. I've worked with housing programs for years. There was a woman, Gordon, investigated for manipulating families, making false claims to justify interventions. She was fired. Robert's knees nearly buckled. So, she lied to my children. She poisoned the last years I had with them. Emily stood, reaching for him. Dad, we're so sorry. We didn't understand. Mom tried to tell us later, but we thought she was only trying to protect you. We didn't know what to believe. Robert felt the breath leave his lungs. Helen had carried the truth alone. She had tried to protect him, and his children had been bearing misplaced fear, guilt, and confusion for a decade. Mark, voice breaking, added, Dad, we've spent years thinking we were failing you, without even knowing why. The TV clicked back on. Everyone whipped around. Helen's face reappeared, no longer frozen. Her voice returned mid-sentence. And the social worker lied to you. I told her things in confidence, but she twisted them. She made you believe your father was unsafe, when he was the safest place we ever knew. Emily burst into fresh sobs. Mark covered his face. Helen continued, voice steady and heartbreaking. Your father loved me through every breath I fought to keep. He stayed awake night after night so he wouldn't miss a single moment with me. He didn't abandon me. You were told a lie. Robert felt his chest shatter. Helen wiped a tear on the screen. I only found out what the social worker said when it was too late for me to fix it. I'm so sorry you grew up thinking your father pulled away. The truth is, he never stopped reaching for you. Emily sank to the floor. Mark leaned on the table, shoulders shaking. Helen whispered, Please, don't let my last months steal the rest of his life. Don't let a stranger's lie shape your love. Robert placed a hand over his heart, whispering, Helen, thank you. But the video wasn't done. Helen inhaled, her expression turning serious again. One last thing. You need to know why I made that final request in my will. Why I asked a lawyer to deliver something on the Christmas when you needed it most. Emily lifted her head, eyes red. What request? Mark whispered. Mom, what did you do? Helen leaned closer to the camera. Your father is not dying, she said, but he will break if you don't do this one thing. Robert held his breath. Helen's voice softened into a plea. "You must open his envelope. Tonight, before midnight." Everyone turned slowly toward the white envelope on the table, sitting there, waiting, silent. Robert's pulse pounded. He hadn't expected Helen to know about it, or to force this moment. Emily whispered, shaking, "Dad, what's in that envelope?" But before Robert could answer, a loud crash came from the hallway, followed by a scream and Daniel shouting, "Stay back!" The scream sliced through the house like a blade. Robert jerked toward the hallway, heart hammering. Emily gasped and stumbled back. Mark lunged forward, nearly knocking over a chair. Abby clutched the reindeer toy to her chest, trembling. "Dad, stay here!" Mark shouted, sprinting toward Daniel's voice. But Robert followed anyway, instincts older than time propelling him forward. Emily rushed behind them, barefoot on the cold hardwood floor. They reached the hallway to find Daniel standing between the children's bedrooms, his arm outstretched protectively. A broken picture frame lay shattered on the floor, glass glittering like ice. And in the middle of it, shaking violently, was Tom Weaver, the night nurse who had delivered Helen's handkerchief. He was on his knees, both hands pressed to his chest as though trying to hold himself together. His breath came out in ragged gasps. I'm sorry," Tom stammered. "I didn't mean to scare anyone. I saw the photo on the wall and—" He pointed a trembling finger at the broken frame. Robert looked up. The photo had been taken 15 years ago. Helen was in the center, smiling. Emily and Mark on either side. And behind them, barely noticeable, was Tom, younger, wearing a volunteer badge, holding a clipboard. Emily's eyes widened. "You were there? At that holiday event? The one Mom said the volunteers organized?" Tom nodded frantically, tears streaming down his face. "She insisted I take a picture with her. Said I reminded her of someone she loved. I shouldn't have touched the frame. I'm sorry. My hand slipped." Mark exhaled sharply. "Man, you nearly gave us a heart attack." Daniel relaxed slightly, lowering his arms. "It's okay. He's overwhelmed." Tom wiped his eyes. "I'm sorry. This family, your mother, she was the kindest person I ever cared for. I just wanted to—" His voice cracked. "To make sure she wasn't forgotten." Emily's expression softened. "She isn't. Not anymore." Mark helped Tom to his feet. "Come on, let's get you some water." But Tom shook his head violently. No, I shouldn't stay. This is your family's moment. Your truth. I already intruded enough." He turned to Robert, eyes full of guilt and admiration. "Sir, she loved you with her whole being. Please don't let grief swallow the years you still have." Robert swallowed hard. "Tom, thank you. For bringing the locket. For keeping her last wish." Tom nodded silently, then slipped out the front door with Daniel guiding him, disappearing into the snowy night. The hallway grew still. Emily hugged herself. "Dad, I'm scared. I feel like everything we believed for years. It's all unraveling at once." Mark leaned on the wall, rubbing his face. "Mom's video, the social worker, the lies. We didn't know how deep it went." Robert took a slow breath. "Your mother tried to protect all of us. But now the truth is here. And all that's left is what we do next." Emily reached for his hand. "What do you want to do next, Dad?" Robert looked at the envelope on the dining table as though it were glowing. Helen's words echoed in his mind. "You must open his envelope. Tonight. Before midnight." He walked back to the dining room, every footstep heavy with 10 years of silence and 10 minutes of revelation. Mark and Emily followed close behind, no longer distracted, no longer dismissive, no longer distant. Abby trailed them quietly, sensing her family changing shape. Robert sat at the table. The envelope lay in front of him, plain, white, silent. The room gathered around it like a circle around a fire. Emily wiped her cheeks. "Whatever's inside, we face it together." Mark nodded. "We're not running anymore." Robert's hand shook as he picked it up, not from fear, from meaning, from memory, from everything he had carried alone. "If I open this," he said softly, "my life changes. All of ours do." Emily squeezed his shoulder. "Then let it change," Mark added, voice steady. "Mom wanted this." Abby whispered, "Grandpa, I'm right here. Robert felt something inside him lift, like a weight finally asking to be set down. With trembling fingers, he broke the seal. Inside were 2 items. 1. A letter, with his handwriting at the bottom. 2. And a legal document, with Helen's signature. Emily leaned closer. What? What is it? Robert opened the letter first. His own words stared back at him. Words he had written weeks before Christmas. Words meant to tell his children the truth about his loneliness. But also something else. He read aloud, I'm selling the house not because I want to leave you, but because I want to stop living in rooms that feel full of people who aren't really there. Emily broke into tears. Mark covered his mouth. Robert continued, but I also want to give you something your mother wanted you to have. Something she asked me to protect until the right Christmas. He reached into the envelope again. His fingers closed around something heavy. When he pulled it out, the room gasped. It was a set of keys, old keys, rusty around the edges, tied with a ribbon Helen had once used for Christmas brunch invitations. Emily whispered, Dad, what are those? Robert opened Helen's legal document. At the top, in bold letters, Transfer of Ownership, Lake Willow Cabin. The cabin where they had spent every childhood summer, the place they hadn't visited in 10 years, the place that held their mother's laughter in its walls. Emily's knees gave out. She collapsed into a chair. Mark whispered, stunned, But we thought it was sold. Robert shook his head. Helen never sold it. She wanted it kept out of reach until you were ready to remember who you were, as a family. Emily sobbed into her hands. Mark sat, eyes glassy. Robert finished reading. This cabin will belong to you, but only if you choose to claim it together. Emily lifted her head. Together? Robert nodded. Together. Mark whispered, Mom planned all of this. Robert placed the keys in the center of the table. You can say no, he said softly. You can walk away. You can pretend nothing changed tonight. He looked up at them, his children, finally seeing him. But if you want another chance, if you want to heal, if you want to bring life back to the places we abandoned, he nudged the keys forward. Then take them. Emily and Mark glanced at each other. A lifetime of misunderstandings between them. A decade of distance. A night full of truth. Emily reached for the keys. Mark reached at the same time. Their hands touched. They didn't pull away. A breathless silence held the room, until Abby suddenly gasped, pointing toward the window. Grandpa, look! They all turned. And there, just beyond the glass, illuminated by the street lamp, stood a figure watching them holding something unmistakable in their hand, something that did not belong to anyone in the family. For a moment, no one breathed. The figure outside stood perfectly still beneath the falling snow, a dark silhouette framed by the glow of the street lamp. The object in their hand glinted faintly in the cold light, metallic, familiar, yet impossible to identify from a distance. Robert stepped closer to the window, his breath fogging the glass. Emily instinctively grabbed Abby, pulling her behind her. Mark moved beside his father, placing a steadying hand on his shoulder. But as the figure stepped forward into the light, the tension in the room eased all at once. It wasn't a stranger. It wasn't danger. It wasn't someone from the past coming to take something away. It was Daniel. His coat was dusted in snow, his glasses fogged, his hair wind-tousled from hurrying back, and in his hand was something small, wrapped in transparent plastic, the item he had rushed after Tom to retrieve. Robert opened the front door before Daniel could knock again. The cold swept into the house, but the warmth of the moment overpowered it. Daniel lifted the object gently. This was on the ground outside, he said. Tom dropped it when he ran. It's yours. Robert took it carefully. It was a photograph, a small worn picture. Helen, younger, vibrant, holding baby Emily at the cabin porch. Robert stood behind them, arms wrapped around both. The edges were softened by years of touch, the kind of touch that only happens when a picture is kept close to the heart. Emily covered her mouth. I don't remember this. Mark leaned forward. Dad, you never showed us this. Robert smiled softly, tears warming his eyes. Some memories I kept for myself, maybe too many, but tonight I think it's time to share them all. Daniel stepped back, giving the family space. I'll head home. But, Robert? He paused, lowering his voice. You're not alone. Not anymore. Robert nodded. Thank you, Daniel, for everything. When the door closed again, the family gathered around the table, as though drawn by gravity. The keys to the cabin sat between them, gleaming faintly beneath the lights. The video of Helen remained paused on the TV, her face soft, hopeful, almost alive. Emily wiped her tears and looked at her father with a new kind of gaze, not the dutiful glance of someone checking on an aging parent, but the raw, open look of a daughter seeing her father's humanity in full for the first time. Dad, she whispered, we want to try. We want to fix this. All of it. Mark nodded, his voice low but certain. We've wasted enough years. The cabin? We'll go. Together, if you'll have us. Robert looked between them, his chest tight with emotion. For years he had wondered if this moment would ever come, if the distance between them was permanent, if love could fade quietly until there was nothing left to save. But Helen had known better. Of course I'll have you, he said. You're my children. You always have been. Emily leaned her head on his shoulder. Mark placed his hand over his father's. Abby crawled into Robert's lap without a word, clutching her reindeer toy. And for the first time in years, the room felt full, not with noise or obligation, but with presence, real presence, the kind Helen had feared they would lose, the kind she fought to restore even from beyond her last breath. Robert lifted the locket that had once belonged to the young woman who changed his life. He placed it gently in the center of the table beside the keys and the photograph. 3 objects, each holding a part of their family's history, each bridging the years they had lost. We'll go to the cabin, Robert said softly, not to forget what happened, but to start again. Emily nodded through tears. Mom would want that. Mark whispered, Mom planned that. Abby looked around the table, eyes wide with childlike certainty. Grandma made a Christmas miracle, and maybe she had. Outside, snow continued to fall, covering the street, the porch, and the world in a quiet white blanket, as if giving the Hayes family a clean page, a new beginning. Robert looked at his children, grown adults who were once small enough to sit on his lap on Christmas mornings, and he saw them differently now, not as failures, not as disappointments, but as human beings, shaped by love, fear, mistakes, and misdirection. Just like him, he took a deep breath, the kind that releases years of heaviness. I'm not selling the house, he said suddenly. Emily blinked. You're not? Robert shook his head. Not yet. Not until we figure out who we are now, as a family. Together. Mark nodded. We want to be part of that. Robert smiled. Then let's start tomorrow. They sat there for a long time, talking, crying, remembering, rebuilding, until the candles melted low and the tree lights dimmed. When midnight came and went, none of them noticed. They were too busy finding their way back to one another. And somewhere deep in the quiet of the night, with the house warm and full again, Robert felt something he hadn't felt in a very long time. Hope. Not the fragile kind that fears disappointment, but the steady kind that believes healing is possible. When the family finally rose from the table, tired and united, Robert looked toward the paused frame of Helen on the TV. Thank you, he whispered. The house seemed to breathe with him. A new chapter had begun. There would still be difficult conversations, still wounds to tend, still years to mend, but they would face it the way Helen wanted, together,